and the Elves, Brothers Grimm. There was once a shoemaker who made shoes and made them well. Yet luck was against him, for although he worked hard every day, he became poorer and poorer until he had nothing left but enough leather for one pair of shoes. That evening he cut out the leather for the last pair of shoes, and then after laying the pieces in a neat row on his workbench, he said his prayers and went peacefully to bed. "I'll get up early in the morning," he thought. "Then I can finish the shoes and perhaps sell them." But when he arose the next morning, the pieces of cut leather were nowhere to be seen, and in their stead stood a pair of beautiful shoes, all finished to the last seam, and sewn so neatly, too, that there was not a flaw nor a false stitch in them. The shoemaker was amazed and did not know what to make of it, but he picked up the shoes and set them out for sale. Soon a man came and bought them, and because he was so pleased with their fine workmanship, he paid more than the usual price for them. With this money, the shoemaker was able to buy enough leather for 2 pairs of shoes. As before, he cut the leather for the next day's sewing, laid it out on his workbench, and went to bed. In the morning, there again were the shoes, 2 pairs this time, all ready to wear. The hammer, the knife, the awl, the wax and twine, the needles and pegs, still lay about on the bench as though someone had been working there, yet no one could be seen. The shoemaker didn't know how such a thing could happen, but he was glad it happened all the same. Again he was lucky enough to sell the shoes for more than the usual price, and this time he was able to buy enough leather for 4 pairs of shoes. Well, so it went on. Night after night he cut out the leather and laid it on his workbench. Morning after morning, there stood a row of handsome shoes, ready to sell, ready to wear. And day after day, buyers came and paid such a good price for the shoes that the shoemaker was able to buy more and more leather and sell more and more shoes, until at last he was poor no longer and even became a well-to-do man. Then one evening, it was not long before Christmas, the shoemaker, after laying out the leather for many pairs of shoes, went to his wife and said, "How would it be now if we stayed awake tonight and watched for a while? I would like to see who it is, or what it can be, that is so good to us." "Yes," said his wife, "that I would like to know too." They lit a candle and set it on the table, then hid in a corner behind some clothes which were hanging there. Here they waited until at last, just at midnight, there came 2 pretty little elves without a stitch of clothing to cover them. Quickly, the little creatures sprang upon the workbench and began making shoes. Swiftly and nimbly they worked, piercing and punching and sewing, pegging and pounding away with such skill that the man and his wife could scarcely believe their eyes. And so the little elves worked on with tiny flying fingers, and didn't stop for a moment until all the shoes were finished down to the last stitch and peg. Then, in a twinkling, they leaped up and ran away. Next morning, the woman said, "Husband, what I was going to say, those little elves have made us so rich, to show our thanks would be no more than right. There they run around, poor little wights, all bare and must surely freeze. Do you know what? I will make them some clothes, and knit them each a pair of stockings. You can make them each a pair of little shoes, yes?" "Oh, yes, the shoemaker would gladly do that." And so one evening, when everything was ready, they laid out their presents instead of the cut-out leather, then hid once more behind the clothes in the corner, and waited to see what the little creatures would do. At midnight, there came the two little elves, skipping along, ready to sit down and work as usual. They looked, but saw no leather anywhere. They looked again, and spied the row of little garments lying on the workbench. 2 little shirts and jerkins, 2 pairs of breeches, 2 peaked hats, 4 little stockings, and 4 tiny shoes with pointed toes. At first they seemed puzzled, as though wondering what these things were for. But then, when they understood that the clothes were meant for them, they were filled with joy. Quickly they picked up one little garment after another, dressing themselves with lightning speed, and all the time they laughed with delight and sang, "Now we are jaunty gentlemen, why should we ever work again?" When they were fully dressed, from peaky hats to pointed shoes, they began to skip and run around like wild, so glad and gleeful were they. There seemed to be no end to their capers, as they leaped over the chairs and delved among the shelves and benches. But at last, after spinning round and round like tiny tops, they clasped hands and went dancing out of the door. They never came back, but the shoemaker and his wife were always lucky after that, and they never forgot the 2 little elves who had helped them in their time of need.